The great city of Veloria Prime once stood as the pride of the galaxy. Its tall silver towers reached the clouds, and its streets were filled with glowing lights and proud citizens. Now the city looked tired and broken, just like its people. The war with humans and other alien races had left deep scars on everything. Many towers were half destroyed, and soldiers marched in the streets, looking weak and tired. In the heart of the royal palace, Princess Illyra sat quietly on her floating throne. Her long silver hair fell over her shoulders, and her violet eyes stared out at the empty hall. She wore a smooth exosuit that helped her move, but everyone knew the truth. Illyra could no longer walk on her own. An old assassination attempt had left her body paralyzed from the waist down. Only her sharp mind remained strong. The nobles of the Valorian Empire stood in small groups, whispering to each other. None of them dared to speak to Illyra directly. They bowed politely when required but turned their faces away when she looked at them. To them, she was a broken princess, a symbol of their fallen empire. Who would want a queen who couldn't even stand? Illyra heard their whispers. She always did. She cannot rule us. Why doesn't she step down and let Lord Valen take the throne? No man would want to mate with a crippled princess. The words stung, but she kept her face calm. She had learned long ago to hide her feelings. Today, however, something was different. A human ship had arrived, carrying a group of diplomats. The Valorian Empire needed help. Their army was weak, and their resources were running out. The humans had won many battles, and now they came to talk of peace. But Illyra knew what peace really meant. It meant giving up power. It meant letting humans decide the future of Valoria. And yet, what choice did they have? When the great doors of the hall opened, everyone turned to look. A group of humans entered, tall and proud. At their head walked Captain Eric Mason, a man known across the galaxy as a hero and a warrior. His sharp green eyes looked over the nobles, then finally stopped on Illyra. Unlike the others, Eric didn't look away. He met Illyra's eyes and gave her a small nod of respect. Illyra raised an eyebrow in surprise. Most humans looked at her with pity or with cold calculation. But this man, his gaze was steady, strong. He saw her, not just the suit she wore. The council began to speak, arguing about terms and demands. Illyra listened quietly at first, letting the others talk. The nobles wanted weapons. The humans wanted promises. Nothing was agreed upon. Finally, Illyra spoke. Her voice was calm, but carried through the hall. "You ask us to give up our fleets," she said, looking directly at Eric. "But if we do, how will we protect ourselves from others who may rise against us? You ask for peace, but peace without defense is surrender." The nobles looked shocked. It was rare for Illyra to speak in these meetings, but Eric simply smiled a little. "And what would you offer, Princess Illyra?" He asked gently. "What can the Valorian Empire give to make peace fair for both sides?" Illyra studied him for a moment. No one had asked for her thoughts like that in a long time. Slowly, she said, "We still have knowledge, technology, and trade routes that can help both our peoples survive. I believe we can offer more than weapons. We can offer partnership." There was silence in the hall. The nobles looked uneasy, but Eric nodded thoughtfully. "That is an idea worth considering," he said. For the first time in a long while, Illyra felt seen, felt heard, but she knew it wouldn't last. The nobles would fight her ideas, and soon they would try to push her out again. Later, after the meeting ended, Illyra sat alone by the palace window, looking out at the broken city. The sun was setting, casting a soft golden light on the ruined towers. She heard a quiet sound behind her and turned slightly. It was Captain Eric, standing there, watching her. "You spoke wisely today, Princess," Eric said. "You see things others don't." Illyra tilted her head. "Do you think that because I cannot walk, I cannot think?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Eric smiled a little. "No," he said. "I think you've had to think harder than most, and I respect that." For a moment, Alyra didn't know what to say. No one had ever said that to her before. Eric took a step closer. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly, "and I think you are the only one here who truly understands what's at stake." Alyra looked at him, her heart beating faster. Was this human different? Could he really see her for who she was? As the sky darkened and the stars began to shine, Alyra wondered if this strange human might be the ally she had been waiting for, and maybe, just maybe, something more. The next day, the great hall of the Valorian palace was full again. Nobles stood in groups, whispering and watching the humans with sharp eyes. They were not happy with how Princess Alyra had spoken yesterday. They believed she had no right to lead the talks. After all, in their minds, she was broken and weak. But today, the humans sat calmly, led by Captain Eric Mason, who seemed unaffected by the cold stares of the Valorian nobles. He stood tall, arms crossed, looking around the hall as if he had nothing to fear. Alyra floated into the room on her throne, her face calm as ever. Inside, she felt a storm of thoughts. She knew her people doubted her. She knew they hoped she would fail, but she had decided to prove them wrong. The meeting began, and the arguments started again. Valorian nobles asked for powerful weapons to protect their empire, but the humans refused. "You ask for weapons when your own people are starving," Eric said firmly. "Peace cannot be built on more war." The nobles grumbled, but none of them had a good answer. Once again, Alyra's voice broke the noise. "Captain Mason is right," she said. "What we need is a future, not more fighting." Her violet eyes looked around the room, daring anyone to challenge her. Eric turned to her, a small smile on his face. "And what kind of future do you imagine, Princess?" Alyra took a deep breath. "One where both our peoples survive. Together." The room fell silent. Whispers filled the corners. No one had expected her to speak of unity with humans. To many Valorians, humans were still enemies, the ones who had beaten them in war. But Eric looked at her, eyes thoughtful. As the meeting ended, Alyra remained in the hall, watching as the nobles left one by one, whispering behind her back. Only Eric stayed behind. He walked toward her throne, stopping a few feet away. "You surprise me, Princess Alyra," he said with a grin. She raised an eyebrow. "Because I do not speak what they want to hear." "Because you speak the truth," he answered softly. For a moment, they looked at each other in silence. Then Eric took a step closer and said something no one had ever dared to say to her. "Will you mate with me?" Alyra froze. Her heart raced in her chest. Had she heard him right? She stared at Eric, searching his face for mockery, but found none. His expression was serious. "Is this a joke, Captain?" she asked, her voice sharper than she meant. Eric shook his head. "No joke. I know what it means in your culture. A mating bond is political, but also personal. It means trust, alliance, and maybe more." Alyra's hands tightened on the arms of her throne. She had dreamed of finding someone who would see her as more than her broken body, but she never imagined a human would be the one to offer. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you ask this?" Eric's eyes softened. "Because I believe you are the only one here strong enough to save your people. And because I see more in you than they do. I see a woman of courage and wisdom, someone worth standing beside." Alyra looked away for a moment, her mind spinning. If she accepted, it would give her great power. No noble could challenge her if she was bonded to a respected human warrior. But could she trust him? Did he truly mean it? Before she could answer, heavy footsteps echoed through the hall. The nobles had returned, led by Lord Valen, her ambitious cousin, whom many believed should take the throne from her. Valen's sharp eyes moved between Alyra and Eric. "What is this?" he sneered. "Is the human bothering you, cousin?" Alyra lifted her chin. "No, Captain Mason and I are discussing an alliance." Valen laughed. "Alliance? With him, the human? Have you lost your mind?" Eric stepped forward calmly. "No, Lord Valen. In fact, we are considering a formal bond, a mating pact." The room exploded in gasps and loud whispers. Valen's face turned red with anger. "You cannot be serious. You would bring a human into our royal line." Elira's voice was steady, but her heart pounded. "If I choose to, yes. It is my right as princess." Valen glared at her. "You are unfit to rule. And now, clearly, unfit to think clearly." Before anyone else could speak, Eric raised his voice, calm but strong. "Princess Elira has more courage than any noble I have met. If standing with her makes me an enemy to you, so be it. But know this, humans protect those they respect. I will stand with her against anyone who tries to harm her." The room went silent again. Nobles stared at Eric with shock and fear. A human warrior, willing to defend the princess against her own people. It was unheard of. Elira watched Eric, her mind full of questions, but also a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this bold human was the ally she had always needed. "Very well," Elira said at last. "Captain Mason, I accept your proposal. For now, we shall see where this alliance leads." Eric smiled, bowing slightly. "As you wish, princess." As the nobles watched in stunned silence, Elira knew nothing would ever be the same again. News of Princess Elira's shocking decision spread through the palace like wildfire. By evening, every noble, soldier, and servant was whispering about her acceptance of Captain Eric Mason's proposal. Some called it a smart move, saying it would save the Valorian Empire from falling. Others whispered with anger, calling her a traitor for choosing the human. But Elira sat in her private chamber, looking out over the dark city, her mind full of thoughts. The stars above Valoria Prime twinkled, but to Elira, they felt far away, like her dreams of freedom and strength. Her trusted maid, Ceres, stood quietly near her, watching the princess with worried eyes. "Princess," Ceres said softly, "are you sure about this alliance with the human? The nobles are furious. They say you are betraying our people." Elira gave a sad smile. "Perhaps they are right to be angry, Ceres. But if I do nothing, our empire will die. The humans offer help. And Captain Mason, he offers more than just words. He offers loyalty." Ceres frowned. "But will he stay loyal, princess? Or is this just a trick?" Elira turned to face her maid, her violet eyes sharp. "That is what I must find out." Meanwhile, in the guest quarters, Eric stood by the window, looking out over the city. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Jenna Ross, stood behind him. "Sir," Jenna said carefully, "you surprised everyone with that proposal, including me." Eric smiled a little. It was the only way to give her power. The nobles won't follow her, but if I stand beside her, they will have to think twice. Jenna raised an eyebrow. "But is that the only reason? Or is there something more?" Eric didn't answer right away. He thought about Elira, the strength in her eyes, the calm in her voice. She was not like anyone he had ever met. "She's different, Jenna. Stronger than they see. I think she could be a great leader if given the chance." Jenna nodded slowly. "And what if she says no later? What if she changes her mind?" Eric looked out the window, serious now. "Then I will accept it. But until then, I will keep my promise to stand with her." The next day, the royal court gathered again. The nobles looked angry, and Valen stood at the center, speaking loudly. "My lords and ladies, do we want a human to rule us, to join our royal bloodline? This is a disgrace." Many nobles nodded, shouting in agreement. Elira entered the hall, floating on her throne. She moved to the front, facing Valen and the crowd. Eric walked beside her, calm and confident. "Enough," Elira said, her voice steady. "I am still the Princess of Valoria, and I have made my choice. Captain Mason is now my ally and protector." Valen sneered. "You speak of alliances, but what proof do we have that this human won't betray us the moment it suits him?" Eric stepped forward. "You want proof. He pulled a small device from his pocket and pressed a button. A hologram appeared, showing a message from the Human High Council, offering resources, food, medicine, and ships, all in exchange for peace. "This is my promise," Eric said firmly. "If Princess Elira and I stand together, your people will survive. If you refuse, then you will face the end alone." The nobles looked at each other, murmuring. The offer was more than they had hoped for. But Valen was not finished. He turned to Elira, ice cold. "Even if we accept this deal, Princess, you are still unfit to rule. You cannot even walk. How will you lead us in battle or stand before other empires?" Elira's hands tightened on the arms of her throne. She knew this moment would come. "I may not walk, Lord Velen," she said, her voice rising, "but I have walked through fire. I have survived when others would have given up. My mind is sharp, my will strong. I do not need legs to lead. I need courage, wisdom, and allies, like Captain Mason." Eric stepped closer, placing a hand on the arm of her chair, supporting her without words. "If you cannot see her strength," Eric said to Valen, "then perhaps you are the weak one." The room went silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then an old noble, Lady Aria, who had been silent until now, stood up. "Princess Elira speaks true," Lady Aria said. "She has shown more courage than any of us. I support her." Slowly, more nobles began to nod, some standing beside Lady Aria. Valen's face darkened, but he said nothing more. He turned and walked out, his followers behind him. When the hall was quiet again, Elira turned to Eric. "You have given me more than I expected, Captain," she said softly. Eric smiled. "And you've given me hope that this empire still has a future." As they left the hall together, Elira felt stronger than she had in years. For the first time, she wasn't standing alone. But in the shadows, Valen watched them go, his eyes full of anger. And in his mind, a plan was forming. A plan to take the throne, no matter the cost. The days after Princess Elira's public alliance with Captain Eric Mason were filled with tense silence and quiet whispers. Though many nobles had finally agreed to support Elira, there were still those who hated her choice, and hated the human even more. Inside her private chamber, Elira looked over a glowing map of Valoria Prime. Her violet eyes were sharp and serious. Eric stood beside her, arms crossed, watching as she moved pieces around on the map. "If we do not secure the outer cities soon," Elira said quietly, "they will fall into chaos. And if that happens, our enemies will attack." Eric nodded. "You're right. But if we show unity now, maybe we can bring those cities back under control before it's too late." Elira glanced at him. "You believe they will follow a broken princess and a human warrior." Eric smiled softly. "I believe they will follow strength and hope. And that's what we are. Together." His words gave Elira some comfort. She had not felt this kind of hope in a long time. But outside the palace walls, danger was growing. Lord Valen, her ambitious cousin, was not ready to give up. In a dark room deep beneath the city, Valen stood with a group of nobles and old generals, all gathered around a table. "Elira has made a fool of herself," Valen said coldly. "And now she brings a human into our royal bloodline. This is an insult to everything we stand for." One of the old generals, General Kor, frowned. "But she has support now. Many nobles stand with her. And with the humans promising aid, she has grown stronger." Valen slammed his fist on the table. "Then we must act before she becomes too powerful." "What do you suggest?" asked one noble quietly. Valen leaned in, eyes sharp as blades. "We remove her, quietly, before the human can protect her." Gasps filled the room, but no one spoke against him. They all knew what Valen was saying. He was planning to kill the princess. "We can't attack her directly," General Kor said. "Too many eyes are watching. But if there were an accident..." Valen's lips curled into a cold smile. "Exactly. A hunting trip. A failed machine. Many ways to hide the truth. The nobles exchanged looks but finally nodded. The plot had begun. Back in the palace, Elira and Eric sat together in the garden. The night sky above was clear, and stars shone like diamonds. For a while, neither spoke. They just sat quietly, enjoying the peaceful night. Finally, Eric turned to her. "You seem quiet tonight, princess. Is something troubling you?" Elira sighed. "I feel like the calm before a storm, Captain. I know Valen will not accept my rule. He is waiting, watching." Eric nodded. "Then we will watch too. And when the storm comes, we'll be ready." Elira smiled softly. "You always speak as if nothing can defeat you." Eric chuckled. "That's because I've faced worse. But I also know when to be careful. And right now, I'm worried for you." Elira looked into his eyes, searching for any lies, but saw only truth and concern. "Captain Mason," she said gently, "why do you care so much for me? You could have left, made your deal, and gone home." Eric was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Because when I look at you, I don't see a broken princess. I see a leader, someone who refuses to give up, even when the world turns against her. And maybe, because I want to be part of that fight." Elira felt warmth in her chest at his words. She wasn't used to kindness, not real kindness. "Thank you, Eric," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." As they sat there under the stars, neither noticed a shadow moving in the darkness, a spy listening to every word. The next morning, a noble rushed into Elira's chamber, bowing low. "Princess, Lord Valen has invited you to join him for a royal hunt in the forests beyond the city." Elira raised an eyebrow. "A hunt? Now? Why?" "He says it's a chance to show the nobles that you are strong and ready to lead." Eric, who stood nearby, frowned. "Sounds like a trap." Elira looked thoughtful. "Perhaps, but if I refuse, the nobles will say I am weak. If I go, I must be careful." Eric stepped closer. "Then I'm going with you." Elira smiled slightly. "Of course, Captain. I wouldn't trust anyone else to guard my back." As Eric left to prepare, Elira stared out the window, her mind racing. She knew Valen was dangerous, but now she was sure. He was planning something. Still, she would not hide. She would show them all that a true leader does not run from fear. But in the shadows, Valen was already preparing his final move. And if Elira was not careful, this hunt might be her last. The bright sun rose over Valoria Prime as the royal hunting party gathered near the grand forest gates. Nobles in shining armor mounted their tall alien beasts, while servants prepared food and gear. But behind all the smiles and polite greetings, danger was hidden like a snake in the grass. Princess Elira sat in her floating chair, calm and graceful as ever. By her side stood Captain Eric Mason, watching every movement around them with sharp eyes. "You shouldn't be here, Princess," Eric said in a low voice. "This is a trap. I can feel it." Elira looked at him and smiled gently. "I know, Captain. But if I do not come, they will call me a coward. And a true ruler must show strength, even in the face of danger." Eric sighed but nodded. "Then I won't leave your side." Soon, Lord Valen arrived, riding his dark beast, his sharp eyes watching Elira. He gave her a fake smile. "Ah, cousin, I am glad you accepted my invitation. Today, you will prove to the nobles that you are still worthy of the throne." Elira gave a calm nod. "Indeed, Valen. Let us see who is truly worthy." Valen's smile tightened, but he said nothing more. His plan was set, and he had no doubt it would work. The hunting party entered the great forest, where giant trees reached the sky and strange creatures roamed freely. The nobles laughed and chatted, pretending to enjoy themselves, but Eric kept scanning the trees, the ground, and the people around them. Suddenly, Valen rode closer to Elira and Eric. "Captain Mason," Valen said smoothly, "why don't you take the lead? Show us how humans hunt in these parts." Eric raised an eyebrow. I prefer to stay by the princess. Valen's smile sharpened. Surely you do not think she is in danger. This is a friendly hunt. Elira looked at Eric and gave a small nod. Go ahead, Captain. I will be safe. Eric hesitated but then moved forward, leading the way. But as soon as he was a little ahead, Valen's eyes turned cold. He gave a silent signal to one of his men, a hidden assassin, who quietly disappeared into the trees. As they went deeper into the forest, Elira looked around, her mind alert. She knew Valen well. He never did anything without a dark reason. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the trees, and a huge wild beast, with sharp claws and glowing red eyes, charged at Elira. The noble screamed and scattered. But before the beast could reach her, Eric appeared like lightning, shooting his weapon straight at the creature's head. The beast fell to the ground with a heavy thud, dead. Eric rushed to Elira's side. Are you all right? Elira smiled calmly. I knew you would protect me. Valen rode up, pretending to be surprised. What a terrible accident. These woods are dangerous, cousin. Perhaps we should return. Eric glared at him, realizing this was no accident. But Elira spoke before Eric could. No, Valen. I will not turn back because of one beast. Let us continue. Valen's eyes narrowed. He had not expected her to be so brave. As the hunt continued, Eric stayed closer to Elira, now fully alert. But Valen was not finished. Later, when they stopped to rest near a small stream, Valen approached Elira alone, pretending to be friendly. Cousin, he said softly, you should think carefully about your choices. You trust this human too much. He will never be one of us. Elira looked at Valen with calm strength. Perhaps not, but he has done more for me than any of my own people. He protects me when others only plot against me. Valen smiled darkly. And what happens when he grows tired of protecting you? You are weak, Elira. You cannot lead. We will see who is weak, Valen, Elira answered coldly. And if you try anything again, I will make sure everyone knows of your treachery. Valen's smile faded for a moment, but then he laughed softly. We shall see, cousin. We shall see. As the day ended, the hunting party returned to the palace. Many nobles whispered about Elira's bravery and Eric's skill. Some even began to think maybe, just maybe, Elira could be a true leader. That night, Elira sat on her balcony, watching the stars. Eric stood nearby, silent for a while. You were very brave today, princess, Eric said finally. But Valen will not stop. You know that, don't you? Elira nodded slowly. Yes, I know, and I cannot fight him alone. Eric looked at her seriously. You're not alone. You have me. For a moment, Elira looked at Eric, her heart full of feelings she could not yet name. He had risked his life for her, again. Thank you, Eric, she whispered. I don't know what will happen next, but I'm glad you're here. Eric smiled softly. I will always be here, princess, until the end. As the stars shone above them, Elira knew the battle for her throne had just begun. But with Eric by her side, she felt ready to face whatever storm was coming. Yet, far away in the palace shadows, Valen was meeting with his loyal followers, ready to plan his next, even deadlier move. The palace was quiet as night covered Veloria Prime. But inside, the walls whispered with secrets. Princess Elira sat alone in her room, looking out at the city lights below. Her mind was heavy with thoughts of what was to come. Captain Eric Mason entered quietly, carrying a small tray of tea. You should rest, princess, Eric said gently, setting the tray down. You've had a long day. Elira gave him a soft smile. Rest is a luxury I cannot afford, Captain. Not when my cousin plots my downfall. Eric sat beside her, his eyes serious. Then let me help you. We can make a plan. Together. Elira looked at him, her heart warming at his words. You have already risked so much for me. Why do you keep staying, Eric? Eric smiled, but there was a shadow behind it. Because I believe in you. And because I care. Elira looked away for a moment, hiding her feelings. Thank you, Eric. That means more than I can say. Meanwhile, deep in the hidden chambers of the palace, Lord Valen gathered his followers around a long dark table. His sharp eyes glowed in the dim light. She grows stronger, Valen said coldly. The people begin to believe in her. But we will remind them that a broken princess cannot rule. General Kor, sitting at Valen's side, asked, How do you plan to do that? Valen smiled darkly. Tomorrow, during the public feast, we strike, right before their eyes. She will not leave that hall alive. A murmur of agreement passed through the room. But the human, another noble asked. He is always by her side. Valen's eyes narrowed. Then we take him out first. Without his protection, she will be easy to destroy. The next day, the palace was bright with colors and music. A grand feast was held in honor of Elira's bravery during the hunt. Nobles from all over gathered in the great hall, eating and laughing, pretending that all was well. But under the laughter, tension filled the air. Eric stood close to Elira, watching every face, every hand that moved too quickly. His instincts told him danger was near. Elira looked around too, noticing that Valen sat not far from her, smiling politely but with cold eyes. He's planning something, Eric whispered in her ear. Be ready. Elira gave a small nod, keeping her face calm for the nobles watching. As the music played and the nobles danced, a servant approached Elira with a goblet of shining liquid. A gift from Lord Valen, my princess, the servant said with a bow. Eric stepped forward, taking the goblet before Elira could touch it. He sniffed the drink and frowned. Quietly, he whispered, Poison. He turned to Valen with sharp eyes. You would offer poisoned wine to your future queen. Eric said, loud enough for nearby nobles to hear. Gasps filled the room. Valen stood quickly, pretending to be shocked. What are you saying, Captain? I would never. Elira rose, her voice strong. Captain Mason would not speak without reason, cousin. Do you deny this insult? Valen looked around at the watching nobles. His plan was falling apart, but he was not finished. Enough of this, Valen shouted, pulling a blade from his side. You are not my queen, Elira, and I will never kneel to a princess who hides behind a human. The hall exploded in chaos. Nobles screamed and ran for safety. Eric pulled his sword in a flash, standing between Elira and Valen. You'll have to get through me first, Eric said calmly. Valen's eyes burned with rage. Gladly. The two men clashed in the center of the hall, blades ringing loudly as they struck. Eric fought with sharp focus, blocking every attack Valen threw at him. But Valen was skilled, and the fight was fierce. Elira watched, her heart pounding, as Eric and Valen battled across the room. At one point, Valen slashed Eric's arm, drawing blood, but Eric didn't back down. He pushed Valen back with powerful strikes, forcing him toward the wall. You can't win this, Valen, Eric said through gritted teeth. Valen sneered. If I die, I'll take you with me. With a sudden move, Valen rushed at Eric, blade high. But Eric was ready. With a swift turn, he knocked Valen's sword from his hand and pointed his own blade at Valen's throat. It's over, Eric said firmly. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to them. Elira stepped forward, her voice calm but filled with power. Valen, you have betrayed me and our people. You tried to kill your own blood. You are no longer part of this house. Valen glared at her, but said nothing. He knew he was beaten. As guards came to take Valen away, the nobles turned to Elira. For the first time, many of them bowed deeply. Long live Princess Elira, someone whispered, and soon the whole room was saying it louder. Long live Princess Elira. Elira stood tall, looking at Eric. He smiled, though his arms still bled from the fight. You did it, Princess, Eric said quietly. Elira shook her head gently. No, we did it. As the crowd cheered, Elira and Eric stood together, knowing that though one battle was over, their journey was not yet finished. But now, with trust and unity, they were ready for whatever would come. The morning sun rose gently over Veloria Prime, casting a golden glow over the royal palace. The dark clouds that had hung over Elira's future seemed to be lifting. Birds flew high, singing songs of peace. Inside the palace, Princess Elira sat in the royal garden, watching the flowers sway in the soft breeze. Her face was calm but thoughtful. She knew that the battle with Valen had been just one part of her journey. The people now supported her, but there was still much to be done to bring true peace and strength to her kingdom. Captain Eric Mason walked into the garden, his arm now bandaged but healing well. He smiled as he saw Elira sitting quietly. "Good morning, Princess," Eric said warmly. "You look deep in thought." Elira smiled softly. "Good morning, Eric. Yes, I was thinking about everything that has happened. It feels like a dream sometimes." Eric sat beside her. "It's real, Elira. You stood strong. You showed them that you are a true leader." Elira looked at him with grateful eyes. "I could not have done it without you, Eric. You have been my shield, my sword, and my friend." Eric gave a gentle laugh. "Always, Princess. I will always stand by you." Later that day, Elira and Eric walked through the city streets together. People came out of their homes, bowing and smiling at their princess. "Long live Princess Elira," many called out. Children ran with flowers, handing them to her. Elira bent down and accepted the gifts, her heart full. She saw hope in their eyes, hope she had not seen for a long time. Eric watched as Elira talked to her people, asking about their lives and problems. He smiled to see her kindness and strength. "You are winning their hearts," Eric said softly as they continued walking. Elira glanced at him. "And I will protect them, Eric. I will not let anyone harm them again." That evening in the Grand Council Hall, Elira sat on her throne. Around her stood the nobles, many of whom now respected her. "Today," Elira began, "we start a new chapter for Veloria Prime. No more secret plots, no more fear. We will build a kingdom where every voice is heard." The nobles nodded in agreement. Even those who once doubted her now saw her as a true leader. Elira continued, "I will create a new council, made of nobles and common people, to help guide our land. And to keep us safe, I will form a new royal guard, led by Captain Mason." The room filled with applause. Eric was surprised but bowed deeply. "I am honored, my princess." Elira smiled. "You have earned it, Eric. You have earned the trust of the people, and mine." As night fell, Elira stood on her balcony, looking out over her city. The stars twinkled above, like tiny lanterns lighting the sky. Eric soon joined her, standing quietly by her side. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Elira whispered. "Yes," Eric replied, but he was looking at her, not the stars. Elira turned to him, her expression soft. "You have given me more than protection, Eric. You gave me courage when I had none left." Eric reached out, gently taking her hand. "And you gave me purpose, Elira. I came here as a soldier, but I found something greater, someone worth fighting for." For a moment, they stood in silence, hands gently held, hearts speaking more than words ever could. Elira smiled. "You asked me once if I would mate with you, remember?" she said with a teasing light in her eyes. Eric laughed softly, remembering that awkward moment when they first met. "I do. I was very nervous." Elira squeezed his hand. "Maybe. It's not such a strange idea after all." Eric's eyes widened slightly, but then he smiled, warm and full of hope. "Are you saying?" Elira nodded gently. "Yes, if you still want to." Eric took a deep breath and smiled brightly. More than anything. The next day, news spread across Veloria Prime. The princess had chosen her champion, the human who had stood by her when all others doubted her. The people cheered, happy to see their beloved Elira find someone who truly cared for her. A grand celebration was planned, not just for their bond, but also for the new beginning of their kingdom. In the days that followed, Elira and Eric worked side by side. They'd rebuilt trust with the nobles, created fairer laws for the people, and made sure no one would ever threaten the peace again. Elira's leadership, with Eric as her loyal captain and partner, brought a new era for Veloria Prime. Together, they showed that courage, kindness, and unity were stronger than any blade or plot. And though many challenges still lay ahead, Princess Elira and Captain Eric Mason stood ready to face them together. As partners, as friends, and perhaps as something more. As the suns of Veloria Prime set, casting a soft glow over the city, the people looked up to the palace with hope, knowing their princess was no longer alone, and that their future was finally bright.